completely machinima. And now for something completely machinima. And now for something completely machinima.
Hello and welcome to And Now for Something Completely Machinima, the podcast about machinima, virtual production, and related technologies like Tron.
Indeed.
I'm one of your co-hosts, Phil Rice, and I'm here with Damian Valentine, Ricky Grove, and Tracy Harwood.
Hello.
Hey, folks.
Hello.
So this week we're talking about a film pick that was suggested to us by Biggs Trek, who's been a big supporter of the show, and we like his work too.
Thank you, Biggs.
And he mentioned that I don't remember in reaction to which episode it was that this recommendation came in, but I think we were talking about, it might have been one of those discussions of, well, it's a shame we don't see more good, more narrative stuff out of iClone. And we've had that discussion 1,000 times about Unreal Engine, talking about the plethora of tech demo type stuff. And boy, sure would love to see some rich stories. So whenever we do find a nugget of good story, it's like a big celebration around the completely machinima offices here, quote unquote. Well, the same is true for iClone to some degree, that it seems like there's an awful lot of people using it, but it's rare that that something made with iClone makes it over here. And so Biggs Trek referred us to this series that the creator's name is Aurora Trek. And they have been making machinima with iClone for quite some time, and to a surprising quality standard. And as far as I know, none of us had ever even heard of them. So I thought I'd submit the first chapter of this series that Biggs recommended to us. It's called Quest of a Key, a fantasy adventure series, and we're just looking at chapter 1. So how I would describe this, I guess, is it's kind of set in like a Dungeons and Dragon-y type of, fantasy universe, maybe a little bit of a taste of the vibe of Lord of the Rings, that type of thing. Your typical fantasy adventure, and with what's the term? Diminutive? Is that the right word? Female protagonist.
Short.
And yeah, short. Yeah. And yeah, I found it, this is not the kind of story fare that maybe really lights me up. However, the production quality is pretty terrific. There's some nice voice acting going on. The quality varies between some of the performances, but some of them are very strong. And the animation is really nice in terms of, I don't know if it was mocapped or not. It looks like it probably was, because it seems so custom to the situation. And it's very smooth. It's hard to find like a flaw, the typical stuff that less experienced iClone machinimas mistakes they might make with, obvious clipping of this, that, or the other, and maybe the clothes don't align right or things like that. And this person has worked through all of that and come out with something that's fairly polished. I did find myself wondering, there's kind of a sharpness to the image that seems to be lacking, and I'm not sure if it's because it's lit entirely in iClone. He doesn't really say much about the production process in the description, and maybe someone in the audience would be able to enlighten us, or maybe one of you know. But as soon as I watched it, I thought, I wonder what this would look like if they ran it through Omniverse or rendered it in Unreal Engine or something, because this is one where there's so much complexity to the scenes, and the lights are are used properly, but there's just kind of like a fogginess over the whole image. And I say that because I tend to hit my head against that quite a bit working in iClone myself and have to figure out ways to de-emphasize that. So, but overall, the look of it's very nice. The music is really excellent. The sound is pretty good. There's areas where we talk sometimes about for sound and even for the vocal performances to really get you immersive, there has to be a sense of the space that they're in, which is typically done by adding some reverb or something like that.
Right.
There's a key scene where the lead character goes into kind of a cavernous space and the reverb is there. And that's when I realized, oh yeah, that's the first time I've really heard a room so far. But
Yeah.
she was in other places indoor that it came off very dry. And that's just a lack of you don't need much. You put too much and it sounds awful. It sounds like they're talking in a barrel. So that would be a criticism on the sound side. The quality of the sound effects, the timing and everything is I mean it's just it
Yeah.
all feels like it fits. There's one point where she bangs a pan to get a whole room's attention. You hear it before you see it. Just nicely done. Nice shot selection, good direction. Again, the story is not it's not something that I'm terribly excited about, but I really admire the craft going on here, and I'm curious what you guys think.
Same thing. Stereo sound effects occasionally were off, placement of things. Basically, it's the mastering of the sound that was needed to have more work
Mhm.
on it. One pass by somebody who's really good at that would have fixed all of those things. And none of those mistakes were enough to pull you out of the story. So
Yeah.
these are nitpicks by two guys that love to master sound.
Yes.
Um, the rendering was good. I didn't get that diffuse thing that you did, but I did think that the faces in particular needed to have a little more texture. Everything was smooth, almost clay-like, which is a giveaway that it's a 3D image. Some of the animations, I recognize some of the animations from an animation library. So
Okay.
I don't think there was any motion capture there. There might have been some, but I think most of it was either done pose to pose or was taken from a library that they bought through iClone. That's one great thing about iClone and Real Illusion is they have their own marketplace, so you can buy stuff there. It does get pretty expensive, so you have to be careful. There were some very beautiful shots in it. The story was simply told. It was well executed. It was a very enjoyable show. I, it didn't reach the kind of mastery that we saw last week with Among Fables and Men. This is a more traditional kind of story,
Hmm.
but for what it is, I enjoyed it very much. I came away with a smile on my face, and I thought, wow, I'd like to know what happens next. It was good.
Before whoever goes next, Ricky, I'm curious. Based on our discussion last week about realism as a style, so this leans more in the direction of realism, but it's not really purely realism. I guess would this fall into that category
Yeah, it
of
would be
realism?
realism, realism, fantasy world in
Maybe
which,
a stylized realism or something.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a particular look to it. The colors might be a little different than what you would see in actual life. The scale of certain things might be different than if it was real, you know. It's definitely a style, realistic style, but
Gotcha.
there's a kind of softness to the realism.
Hmm.
There's not this hard thing like yeah, but that would be in the writing too. I mean, if she got pissed off and suddenly there was a fight in the bar, you might say that was more realistic. So there's a little softness to it, but it definitely is a realistic style, but
Gotcha.
done in their own way. A little bit of an anime style to it, although much
Mhm.
slower than anime.
So I can talk about some of the iClone stuff. In the credits for the video, they do talk about doing motion capture, and They've both got the same last name. I don't know if they're brother and sister, or husband and wife, or anything like that. That's something I suspect Tracy will have dug up.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, there was motion capture involved with this film. I don't know how much of it, if it was all of it, or if it's just some of it. So I can't speak to that. There's a little bit about the characters' design, and they were found. The characters came from DAZ 3D and imported into iClone. I think there's a comment somewhere. Someone was asking about it on the video, and they're saying that they get their characters from DAZ because it adds more to the characters than just using character creator. And I think that's one of the reasons why it eliminates the clipping because it's just not there. Whereas if you, it's one of the downsides of using Realism's character creator. You basically have a naked character and you put the clothes on top of them, but sometimes the skin underneath can come through the clothes and things like that. And even when you try and adjust the texture, like the transparency, you start to try and figure out where it's coming through, and that can be a bit of a painstaking process. And sometimes you can still miss a bit, and you've got the video out and think, oh, I missed that bit there where there's a little bit of skin showing just for a
Yeah, yeah.
second. It's so easy to do because sometimes it can be tiny, or if the clothes match the skin color fairly closely, you can miss it unless you're looking really closely. It's an easy
But
mistake
that
to make.
doesn't happen with Daz.
I don't think so because the clothes are part of the character model as well, so they're not over the
Ah,
top of the naked body. They're part of the body as well, so it's done differently. I've never used that as a source or anything like that. I was kind of watching this and thinking maybe that's a place to look at. On the other hand, I do still like having the full control of the way the characters look with character creator, which I don't know how much control does. I know it's people create models and share them, and you can buy them, but I don't know the process of actually creating characters with it. Um, I was very pleased to see another iClone story-driven thing, given that's something that I do myself, and I often think I wish other people were using this tool because I want to see what other people see when they see my work. I want to have that experience seeing what other people create, and this was a really good example of it. And I was very impressed by the actual character animations. Feel like I need to practice my motion capture skills a bit because this is a lot smoother than what I do. Um, so yeah, I kind of need to step up my game there. The characters, like the look of the faces, that they're Ricky, you mentioned that they were smooth and kind of clay-like. I think that's because they don't have the very realistic skin options that are available to character creator. I think that might be a DAS thing. And that's obviously the look they wanted to go to because once they've imposed the character, you can probably adjust the textures if you wanted to, but this is the look they're going for. And I'm pretty sure, last thing I'm going to say, I'm pretty sure at some point, it's either in the credits or in the comments, they mentioned that they started this with iClone 7 and iClone 8 was released during the process. So at some point they switched between the two
hmm.
as they were making it. So I don't know if all the footage was re-rendered again in iClone 8 or if they just used what they had already and then added 8 on top of it and edited it together. It didn't really specify. It's just something that happened. I kind of got the impression it caught them by surprise because Real Legion do tend to announce
Yeah.
something and it's released very quickly afterwards. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, but yeah, I really enjoyed this film, and the series is still ongoing. And I believe chapter 5 was released 4 months ago, and I need to catch up and watch them. I don't know if that's the end of the story because obviously I haven't watched it yet, but I'm eager to watch more.
Yeah, I've got a few comments. Um, I'll go through everything and then maybe we can pick up on some of the points that I want to make because they're a little bit different to the points that you guys have made. I mean, they're basically this one is basically sort of positioned as a kind of a medieval fantasy series set in the world of magic, mystery, monsters, and mechanisms. And as you said, it's right up to episode 5. But none of the magic, mystery, monsters, and mechanisms are really revealed in any of these 5 episodes just yet. The mechanism, you could say, has been. So it's it's badged as an animated story with original characters, original settings, original music score, and it apparently in the description also builds upon the Star Trek Aurora Star Trek kind of universe with the same kind of sense of silliness and spectacle from that kind of Aurora series. So it's building on a repertoire and an aesthetic approach that has been well trodden for this kind of creator. And obviously, as you said, it's also dipping its toe into the Lord of the Rings universe and also the Dungeons and Dragons type feel as well. As kind of talking about kind of heroes and these fantastic quests. Now, you've talked about it being machinima using these kind of tools, iClone, Cinema 4D, DAS, and what have you, rather than a specific game. And I actually think had the creator used a game, they'd have ended up with something a little stronger than what they've got now. And I'll tell you for why as I go through all my comments. I think what we're seeing here, though, isn't, I mean, with this particular one, so, I mean, Aurora Trek, the episodes are a lot longer. With this, the episodes are really short. But I actually think what we're looking at here is a long form animation style. This guy, Tim Vining, is the creator, Aurora Trek, has got websites and channels for both Quest and Aurora Trek. And from those sites, you can clearly see how much detail and effort has gone into creating the works. I think Quest to the Key actually has been a concept with a really long lead time. The trailer for it was released in 2017. So I'm not at all surprised to hear you say that actually iClone has been updated. I don't know when 7 came out. He probably started on 6 at some point. So yeah, he's been going a long time with it. And I think when you look at the trailer, the first part of the chapter that we looked at chapter 1, which was released in 23, I think, 6 years later, actually includes the same footage without any kind of changes to it that I could discern whatsoever. So, yeah, I think parts that have been sort of on a slate for a long time. Clearly, what this guy has is a really well developed skill set in CG storytelling. His character animation is one thing, but I also think the camera movement, the scene composition, the lighting, the rendering, which are all clearly, quite crucial for bringing the story to life, I think are all pretty well done in this. I mean, I think the editing is really well done. I think the sound design. I mean, I watched the points at which they were tapping and movement, and the sound is bob on with all the movement that's going on in the scene, in which in places there's a lot going on. So all of that is incredibly well done. In the series, though, there's multiple characters, which I think also highlights the pacing and plot progression and the voice acting and orchestration and storytelling and script structure, all of which I think are worth noting too. Chapter 1 is basically the introduction to the central character, and it really just introduces her kind of tenacious personality. She's evidently lacking a little in confidence for what you might call a sort of a traditional adventuress. All of that comes over really well, but I felt initially it was just a little slow for a shorter episodic animation. By about a third of the way into that story, the first episode is 11 minutes long. By about a third in, that kind of middle third, I think, is when it started to pick up and to become more of a short type animation. And that's where the storytelling chops, I think, begins to shine a little through what we're seeing. The character and animation editing, as I said, is really quite outstanding. The movement and the progression of the story, I think, is interesting. And again, I think the sound design and score is what helps to drive it, because there are a lot of scenes in that first episode, and it made me wonder why a game hadn't been selected for this, because that would have enabled a faster paced emphasis on the original characters. Whereas, of course, what you've got and what's evident here is that the scenes have taken a lot of effort to build. And in comparison to the characters, I think are really rather bland and feel just a little bit off the shelf. I think you've alluded to that in some of the comments that you've made. Now, the characters, I think, are clearly drawing very heavily on Lord of the Rings, the gnome or dwarf-like focal character, and then the elf. And there's also a Strider-like character briefly introduced, with some kind of mystical or kind of cursed ghosts. Very much, I think, in the mold of the Men in the Mountain. It begins to make a growingly complex plot. But I kind of wondered where that was all going, and it made me want to watch chapter 2. In actual fact, I, in the end, watched all 5 chapters. So the plot in chapter 2 is really quite accelerated by comparison to what you've got in chapter 1. It's quite different, though. It's entirely focused on narrative, and there's a lot of detail and reveal, basically, of the backstory to this sort of central character and this mechanical device that's driving the story. But in chapter 2, it's the voice acting that takes central stage, because I feel the animation is quite a bit weaker in that particular episode. And it's the voice acting of the main character that I assume has been done by, I would guess Jeanette Vining is Tim's wife. Could be wrong here. She's credited with doing the mocap, some of the mocap stuff as well. So I would say wife rather than sister. I don't know. Could be wrong. But clearly, evidently part of the animation production team, not really very well credited in the promotion of it. Having said all of that, I think interestingly, the elf character is voiced by somebody called Aaron Sin, who's actually an Emmy Award-winning voice actor. He's also a producer and a writer in film, TV, and game. And he's got a whole bunch of credits behind his names, which then made me look at who are the actors in this. And they're all, every one of them, are professionally trained voice actors. And the music, too, is actually, it's an indie game designer who's also a composer and has got quite a lot of experience in music production and mixed engineering. So it's by no means really an amateur-like production. It's very well, the production quality of it and all of the effort that's gone into that, and especially the effort that's gone into badging it as original, I think is possibly where some of the mistakes have been made, if I can call them mistakes. Perhaps that's too strong a term. But I feel that emphasis on that level of production quality has come at the expense of focusing on actual plot and story itself. And my thoughts are really that there's quite a lot of mismatch between the story's pacing and its complexity and general positioning. So chapter 2 has got a lot more detail into it. It's kind of hard to know what the focus should be on because there is so much detail. And I don't know really what you're meant to retain to take into the rest of the story. I concluded that actually what you've got there is for no other way of describing it, padding, basically. So rather padding it out. So rather than plot development, it's character padding. And that's ultimately true in each of the other 4 episodes, which are all introducing different characters, solely focused on the introduction and the development of the social dynamics between the characters, but essentially just introducing another character. There are no links between any of the episodes beyond the main character and the concept of this quest, but there's no reveal at all of the adventure itself, which kind of might captivate you and tease you into what the challenges might be that await these kind of characters. And by the end of five, you actually, at the very end of five, you do actually begin the quest with a little bit of sailing, almost Argonaut style. But really curiously, instead of sort of starting out through a breaking dawn and, off on this amazing adventure, all you kind of get of it is a sort of end of day glow. And it's the same glow, right the way through the sort of, boarding the ship, getting on it, and, just sort of sailing off. There's no sort of sense of time passing, which is, I think, a little bit of a mistake, because instead of being the start of the adventure, it feels like the end of it, which I think is a shame. But the problem that I also had with that is basically that, having introduced these characters all with different roles, one of the characters that was introduced was as the Trek leader, a Trek lead. And there we are, sailing off, which just didn't make any sense. And moreover, this character just didn't seem to have any input into the decision-making process. So I think plot here is lacking throughout. So a lot of emphasis on character, a lot of emphasis on originality, a lot of emphasis on building out the village that they're all in, but just doesn't go anywhere for me. Kind of made me thought, why present a story in this way? Why do it so that you've kind of spent so much time developing the characters and so little time presenting the quest, as in the title and in the script and the description? Why do that from beginning to end, when what you're trying to do is show shorts and do it in an episodic way? And I think that's where I drew the conclusion that the real reason that he's done it, is basically because the intention is to stitch these episodes together, just simply to produce long-form animation, rather than to tell short stories by episodes. And I'm not sure, therefore, the strategy that has been adopted with this is actually going to work particularly well as a series. I think the pacing and this kind of single narrative arc, beginning to end, is tricky because the story takes so long to get going. I think with shorts, maybe a better strategy is to have more action and then sort of reflect back maybe to the connections to different aspects of the characters as they develop, but in a way that kind of alludes to a plot. And we saw that done particularly well, I think, by Dominski in the Mission series. Complex story, lots of different aspects to it, but it kept you engaged with what's the plot, and we've got none of that in here. I think that the current strategy is going to actually be a bit of a challenge for this creator ultimately, and I'd say that I think really it's I don't know, putting my finger on it is quite a challenge, but I'd say when you're building something that you want to sort of sell as a standalone, as episodic, that to sort of do it in this way, where you're kind of loosely extending lore from other popular content, is probably going to be quite hard to do. I don't know. It's not getting the audience that Aurora Trek generated, for sure. And evidently, it's not really rooted in the popular sort of cultural references that this creator's already sort of tipped into. And I think the reason for that is it's because it just doesn't lead so easily to the adventure. I've no clue really what the adventure is going to be. You can imagine, there's references to some sort of, treasure at the end of whatever it might be, but what the nature of the adventure is, don't know. It therefore then led me to think about, well, who is this for? And I think the creator has given Well, I think they need to give it some more thought, to be honest. I think it's kind of got a vibe of team thematic content, not unlike a bit of an episode of Scooby-Doo, for example, but it kind of lacks action. And I wonder how long the current emphasis on these kind of social dynamics between characters and these kind of vague references to this higher order and promised treasure is actually going to keep viewers interested. I think the length of time between episodes basically means it's not really likely to hold attention for too long, especially if the story depends heavily on the characterizations and the level of detail that has gone into creating those characterizations. I mean, if by the time you get to the adventure, you're going to have to sit and re-watch the first 5 episodes because you can't remember all that detail, I think that's going to be a bit of a problem and a bit of a stopper on this progressing. But whether and when it progresses, I think remains to be seen, at least until the whole thing is released. And then I think the decision needs to be made as to whether to cut this into a feature length or keep it salamied into these episodes, because I think at that point it probably doesn't matter, but it certainly does until then. Because I think finding a way to accelerate the stories into short, cohesive adventures is going to be tricky when so much time has been spent on developing these characters. Unless, of course, the aim is ultimately that these little episodes become backstories to main episodes. There's not a lot of evidence of that at the moment, though. My suspicion, actually, is that Quest is taking second fiddle in any event to Aurora Trek, and we may therefore never really see how the adventures emerge from it, which I think would be a great pity because I think this guy's got a lot of chops and there's more to come here. I'm certain of it. I think that's why I would say the original animation decision may ultimately have been the biggest mistake on this one, because if it had gone instead for an established game world and used it to kind of underpin an original story, which he clearly has some aspects of, I think that would have solved a couple of core problems. Building a world from scratch for one thing, and also positioning the work for an audience or several audiences for another, although of course it would still create many other challenges, no doubt. But it might have helped them get to the point of a story a bit quicker. And I think there's one more thing I'd just like to say, if you can bear with me. I especially liked the way that this creator does the development work for this. When I started doing a bit of the background, looking into it, he's very evidently active in all the creator community fora, on Realizm, on Daz, and various others. And he's discussing with other creators how he's developing the work, the use of the tools, and so on. And I think it's one of the key things, as I've commented on many times before, that makes the machinima community stand apart from other creator communities. So, I think he's done an excellent job in engaging the creator community, if not thinking through exactly where his audience sits for this particular piece of work. So there you go. Quite a few comments. I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers, we don't really focus on the numbers here much. We may marvel sometimes at the number of views that one of our films has gotten. But if you look at the numbers across the span of those 5 episodes, yeah, the audience appears to agree. I mean, the first episode, of course, got a decent chunk of views, nowhere near what any of the Aurora stuff got, but it a very respectable number. And then for the next 2 episodes, it drops to 20% of that. But the chapters 2 and 3 have less than 1,000 views each, and then 4 and 5 it dips by another 50%. So and it could be, Tracy, that's kind of indicative of what you've mentioned, that there's nothing in there there's no hooks. The story doesn't have any hooks to give you a sense of direction, and people do, whether they know how to analyze it like someone, like you does, they feel that, it's an intuitive thing that, well, this just isn't getting me, so that's interesting. It's also interesting to me that the notion that, we've got somebody who's, creating in 3D software, iClone, etc. And here we're the suggestion that they should consider a game, and it's kind of funny to me because it seems like everybody that's been involved in machinima at some point was using it as, gee, one day I'll do this in real software,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Good
it
point.
does make me wonder. Like I don't think I think it's pretty common for someone to get their start in game-based machinima and then kind of use that as they learn certain things about filmmaking and whatnot, and then they desire more freedom in how they can control the environment, and that's what pushes them in the direction of iClone or things like that.
Right. Right.
And so we've always assumed that that's a progression that we can at least relate to because we've seen it how many times, right? And myself included, Damien too. We both got started with games and then moved on to that. I don't know of anyone who's moved the other direction, really. Like someone who has mastered, if we can use that word, the iClone type of character animation and character creation and all of these elements. Wouldn't it be an interesting challenge for that person to step into the very restricted mod-based fight against the game engine world of game-based machinima, right? It would not be a small task.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the skills he learned learning this translate as well the other direction as they do coming from game machinima. There's so much he would have to that would feel like compromises that would be compromises that he would have to make to, let's say, try to make this in one of the Elder Scrolls, or some game like that.
Yeah.
Okay, you can tell your story in Elder Scrolls. All your sets will be built. By the way, you can't really control the characters. You can't do any lip sync. You can't close them how you want. You can't mocap. You can't. I mean, so is it really? Would it be a net gain in time, the fact that he didn't have to build the sets, or maybe he's just gotten
I'm not really
fast
talking
at
about
building
time,
sets?
Phil.
That's right.
Okay.
I was going to say that Tracy is not talking about the actual technical switch. She's talking about connecting it to a story that's already set in a game world.
Okay.
As opposed to creating your own.
So more
and
of
failing at
existing
that.
audience kind of thing.
Engage it. Have an engagement using a game-based world. Isn't that what you were saying, Tracy?
It is, but I'm also talking about, because the plot isn't there, practice creating the plot and, forget about the emphasis on building out the originality of the world and start focusing on telling a story with if an adventure story is what you want to tell, then tell an adventure story. We're not seeing an adventure story here. We're seeing character stories, character developments.
Yeah.
And it's an entirely different thing.
Yeah, no, that makes me wonder it seems like that the emphasis that he put his time on for so long prior to this was a Star Trek fan production where he did have that existing universe to lean on. And maybe it's not. I haven't watched Aurora, so I don't know if it actually references genuine characters from Roddenberry's Star Trek or not, but at least the universe is there. So there's certain things you don't have to explain. And you know what types of characters are common. So even if it's not the exact pointy-eared character from Star Trek, it's someone that looks just like that. So it's like, oh, that's one of the Vogons, or so I get it. Yeah, that in this it doesn't seem to be pulling from anything except arguably the broad Tolkien
fantasy world,
D&D. Which that's the order of those things, by the way, is Tolkien and then D&D built on that, and then so he's leaning on that. But the thing is D&D isn't a story world, not really. Like, what's the story of Dungeons and Dragons? Well, there's no such thing, really. There's lots
Right.
of stories, but the whole notion of it was you create the story.
It's a
So
structure.
either you're going to go to Tolkien's, you're going to go to Middle Earth. There's a story world going on, or you're going to go on this abstracted layer, which is D&D. And then it does answer some questions. You can have a dragon appear and nobody's going to be shocked, but you could have magic spells and all that stuff, or orcs. But there's no story to lean on. And in Star Trek, even if you don't focus on one particular series within the Star Trek world, there is a broader overarching story that is encapsulated in the intro phrase, about going to brave new worlds, where no one has gone before, that type of thing, right? So that's a story to latch onto, if nothing else. So yeah, it does present an extra challenge and it makes you wonder, is there this isn't a criticism, it's me just speculating out loud, is there a natural myopia as a story writer that you maybe don't even realize what you're missing because you've just been writing in this way, kind of leaning on that? I don't want to call it a crutch, but that, I don't mean it in a demeaning way, but just you've got that basis that you've been building on, and now you yank that away and just tell story the way that you do, but there's stuff missing, and it's you're not exactly sure how to proceed. I'm not criticizing it at all, or I'm more relating to it as that's really hard as a writer to make that change just like that. So yeah, it's really, really interesting points, Tracy. I appreciate your analysis.
Very deep analysis of it.
It's not to, I don't really
I still enjoy it. I still
Absolutely.
enjoyed
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, it's not to decry the craft that's gone into it, because it's brilliant. But I think if story is what you're about, then tell a story, and it's not there at the moment in the way that it's badged, and I wonder why. And I think the quest for originality has probably let him down a little bit in this regard.
Yeah. I think those things. Go ahead, Damien.
I'm going to add my thoughts to this, having also worked on a fan production in an established world.
That's right.
With Star Wars: Heir to the Empire. Those videos get a lot more views than anything else I do for the simple two words, Star Wars. And I'm sure that with Aura Trek, the Star Trek, those two words will attract a lot more attention than the original project. Yes. And I kind of get the feeling that they're obviously very proud of this fan series they've made. And, they've made quite a few videos, and there's still some test videos being posted, and they're still working on it. But there comes a point when you're working in someone else's world when you think, this is fun, but I want to play in my own world.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think this is. Maybe they haven't figured out everything that needs to exist in their world, and that's what they're doing. And because I got started with a Buffy fan series, and then I did some Star Wars fan films using the Star Wars games. And when I finished that story, I thought, this taught me a lot, but I want to do my own thing now. And there are a lot of flaws in that world I created. I look back at it, I think I know I could do better if I did it now. And I've been playing around with some ideas for creating a new world with the experience I've got now. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to do any Star Wars stuff. But I think the same here with Aurora Trek. They got started with this fan film, but that itch to create their own thing, and they're still filling it out. They haven't figured out all the game rules, so they are relying on Dungeons and Dragons and Lord of the Rings for inspiration because they haven't filled it out. But I imagine that's something that they're working on, and it may take them a while to get to.
The thing is that good criticism, and it's what we practice here, comes in details. Yeah. You can say, oh, I didn't like that, or I didn't like this, but Tracy's somewhat long criticism.
Sorry.
Was a very detailed one. She had obviously thought about this very carefully. So if you're the filmmaker, or if you're somebody trying to understand how to be critical about it, you use details. And all of the details she said were spot on. As soon as she said it, I said, yes, that's right. I saw that. But my watching of it, of the first episode, was not the same as Tracy's watching of it, because she set it up with the whole series. And that's one thing that I like about our 4-person format in criticism. We're all going to look at these things differently and with different depths. And so I appreciate your comments, your long comments, Tracy, but they really made me think.
Good.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I
just
didn't start out, I have to say, to want to watch all 5. It's just that the first episode just I didn't get enough out of it from it's too slow starting, and then it got going, and I thought, well, where is it going?
Yeah.
And it's kind of it just sort of and then the episodes
It's like
themselves
a
are
thread
quite
on the
long.
sweater, right? Yeah.
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 Well, it got your curiosity, but maybe not for the reason that
Well, I then got
creator of
I
the story
need
might
to
have
see
hoped,
this
right?
now. I want to
Yeah.
see where this is going.
Right. Right.
That's right.
But yeah, I was
Well,
going
great.
back. Chronicles of Humanity is my original thing, and that first series, I was still figuring it out. It is really slow to watch because I was trying to introduce the characters in this world. I was doing too much of that at once before getting to the actual story, which I suspect is what they're doing. So when it came to the second season, I thought, I can't do that again. I need to get straight to the story and get things going. So I
And
feel
how
like
did you
season 2 and
Yeah,
3
yeah,
are much
yeah.
better.
how did
And I
you
think
then cut the character bit, the character development though? What did you do with the characters?
Oh, instead of introducing them and setting them up and showing, how they interact with each other, I just got on with the story and let the story and how they respond to what's happening develop the
Be an
characters.
indication of their character.
Yeah,
It's what they do that reveals their character.
yeah. Instead of telling the audience, just let the characters show the audience by doing things,
Mm.
and that drives the
Yeah.
story forward.
Yeah.
Some of the
I think
best
that's
novels do that and are engaging and gripping reads from the beginning for that very reason, that they don't do a bunch of exposition at the beginning, or it's just you learn about the character because you're writing along with them essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tend to
And
like
that's a
novels
wonderful
that
thing.
do that as
Me
opposed
too.
to those that have longer interior revelations of the characters' psyches,
Right.
Yeah.
I get really tired of that.
And so,
Some writers do that really well, and it's interesting, but for the most part, you reveal the character in the actions that they do.
Mm. Mm.
so for example, with Chronicles of Humanity season 2, first episode, one of the main characters was arrested and put in prison at the end of season 1. The first episode is her escape. Someone comes and rescues her and they escapes, and the next few episodes are her being hunted down by the villains of the story. And so she goes to her mum because that's the only person she knows that could help her. And so you get that character introduced, but instead of explaining who her mother is, you kind of get the feel from the way the house looks that they live in. It's a big house. It's
Right.
nicely decorated, so you know that she's quite a wealthy person,
Right.
and she's got power and influence. And she basically says, "I can't come with you, but here's a ship. You can fly away and escape in it." And you got this whole chase sequence going on, and it really drives the story forward. But you get a feel for those characters and how they interact. Like you can tell the mother cares for her daughter just by the way that she says, "Get in this ship and go."
Mm. Mm.
You
Yeah.
don't need to say, "I'm your mother and I love you," and like have a 10-minute
An
emotional scene.
action-oriented story makes the viewer or the reader think, what's going to happen next? What's
Yeah.
going to happen next? Whereas a character-focused story, like, say, a romance genre, it's all about, well, what is she thinking?
Mm.
How does she look? How does she feel about that other character?
Hmm.
And yet you may never leave that room,
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about,
I think
well, she said this and he said that. Go ahead.
It's important to note too that I think that the type of motion or action matters, because it's not like nothing happened in these episodes.
Mm.
Stuff was happening. There was nobody just sitting around. Some stuff was happening, but what caught Tracy's attention was nothing that seemed to form a cohesive attachment to a larger story, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it's the story needs to keep moving. It's not just
Yes.
about keeping them in action. It's does the story get moved forward by the action? And
Right.
so far, that's not something that these chapters are maybe just aren't quite doing yet, you know? So that's great. That's really good stuff. Audience, what did you think of this film? And if you watched all 5 episodes, we'd love to hear about that too. Drop us a comment wherever you watch or listen to this, or send us an email, talk@completelymachinima.com. My name's Phil Rice, and on behalf of my co-hosts, Ricky Grove, Tracy Harwood, and Damian Valentine.
Well, there's just one more thing I wanted to say. Oh, no. Okay. I guess we beat this dead horse down. Okay. Bye-bye.
See you next time.
Bye bye.